of disconnected pieces that are unassembled. No, instead, Luke has brought these pieces together in his gospel for a purpose. He has a purpose. All the different parts, the events, the encounters, the sermons, the conversations, the miracles, everything, it's part of painting a picture of a whole. And Jesus' exposition of Isaiah 61, which we looked at last week, this is the thesis statement for his life and ministry. And Luke fleshes this out with all the different stories he has investigated about Jesus. So last week, Jesus said the words while he was in Nazareth, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This is what Jesus has come to do. This is why God, the Word, became flesh. Certainly, Christ's handling of our urgent, tangible, and felt needs, those things immediately come to mind. Yes, Jesus took care of the immediate needs that people had: hunger, thirst, healing, demon possession, whatever their problems were. Yes, he took care of that. But there was so much more, wasn't there? Because he also he was addressing socioeconomic situations, socio-political situations. He was talking about eternal, metaphysical, spiritual things. All these things come to bear even as he handles something that's physically, materially right in front of him. He's dealing with great, great needs. As part of Luke's answer to, I guess what we could say, the question, Jesus, what are you here to do? What is it you want to accomplish? Why has the Father sent you? And who are you? The Gospel of Luke is the answer to those questions. And it begins with Jesus here to proclaim, here to be the embodiment of the year of the Lord's favor. In verse 38, Luke reveals that Jesus is also a healer. We could even say the healer. He is the healer of all healers. Throughout the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there are recorded some 35 to 40 miracles. And you might wonder, why is there 35 to 40? Why is there a discrepancy in the number? It's really because some people don't necessarily recognize something Jesus did as a miracle. Like, for instance, the resurrection isn't often considered a miracle, but of course it's a miracle, right? When Jesus, in last week's story, remember, everybody accepted his gracious words. They were amazed. They spoke well of him. And then, like a flip of a coin, they were all angry with him. And they were ready to throw him off a cliff, seemingly to stone him. And it says that Jesus just kind of slipped through the crowd and went on his way. And some people say, hey, that was a miracle. I don't know how he did it. How did he slip through the crowd that was trying to kill him? But was it a miracle, or was he just really kind of good at escaping? Is he like a Houdini? But so there's some discrepancy. Are those miracles or not? But there are 35 to 40 miracles. Luke gives us 20 miracles, and 10 to 12 of them are those involving physical disabilities, diseases, and different kinds of medical syndromes. And in some cases, the physical maladies appear to be symptomatic of demon possession. And that we're going to cover in a different section when we look again at how Jesus deals with the spiritual world. But today we want to look at how Jesus encounters people who have these medical, physical needs. So in Luke 14, 1 through 6, we see one example. Jesus is dining with some Pharisees. religious elitists who are watching him very carefully. In fact, they're really investigating him. And Jesus comes across a man with dropsy in the presence of these Pharisees. And today, we call it edema. I believe that's how it's pronounced. And essentially, in layman's terms, it's the swelling of various body parts. It's a type of water retention. But it's a water retention that indicates more serious disease. It's just a symptom of something else. And if you want to know more about edema, we've got a couple of doctors right here in the third row. You can ask them about it later. But all I've read about edema is this. I understand that edema is not what you get when you have a midnight lamyan and then you wake up in the next morning and your thumb feels kind of tight, It's not that kind of water retention. This is because something seriously is wrong with you. And generally, those things that are wrong with you are treatable, but generally incurable, even today. It's something you just have to live with. And you treat the symptoms many times. So here's a guy back in, you could say primitive medical treatment days who has an incurable situation. And Jesus asks kind of a strange question. But I think the strange question reveals that there's a lot more going on here than just physical healing. That Jesus is interested in a lot more than just taking care of his needs. He's also concerned about taking care of some needs that are among the Pharisees too. And so he asks, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And these experts in the law, these religious know-it-alls, have no answer for him. And the Jewish teachers of the law, they have picked God's word apart at every syllable. They have thought through it from every angle, and they have systematized it in a way that they've really answered all the questions. And yet here Jesus asks a simple question. Is it okay for me to heal this guy right now on the Sabbath? And they have no answer for him. And Jesus gives no answer either. He grabs the man, heals him, and sends him on his way. So not only does Jesus liberate the sick man from his illness, but this seemingly innocuous question about healing on the Sabbath indicates that Jesus' ministry is about something else too, at least here. That he's saying, sure, this guy has a disease that's enslaved him, that has oppressed him, but there is another disease, virtually incurable, that is like this too. You know what that is? It's the oppression of religion. Putting God in a box and saying, we've got him all figured out. And we've got all of our rules and regulations, our ordinances, and how we've got God figured out. And he's saying that is oppression too. And with this simple question about the Sabbath, and it's a question he asks numerous times throughout the gospel, numerous times he's confronted because he's healed somebody, done a good work on the Sabbath, to say, God is not a God of oppression. God is a God of liberty. He is an emancipator, a freedom fighter. He is one who wants to take the burden off, not put the burden on. And so if you misunderstand God, you're going to misunderstand his word. You're going to misunderstand the purpose of his laws. They are not to enslave us, but they are to free us. Then in Luke chapter 17, 11 through 19, Jesus comes across 10 lepers. And maybe you remember this story. He heals all 10 of them, and only one of them, a Samaritan, returns, glorifying God, then falling at his feet, at Jesus' feet, to thank him. And while there's still plenty of dispute today about what is biblical leprosy, we know that what's known today as leprosy, Hansen's disease, where, the kind of most grotesque forms of it, parts of people's bodies are like seemingly falling off or missing. That certainly falls into the category of biblical leprosy too. But it goes even farther. It would probably include eczema. Anybody have eczema? Maybe you don't want to admit it. Maybe you have very dry skin. That would be included in leprosy too. Maybe you have rosacea, I think that's what it's called, where you have that redness of your skin that there's just nothing they can do about it. You can't put lotion on it to fix that. But all those things would make you unclean, separate you from society. That God's law itself seems to say, those people cannot be a part of my people. And yet God does give remedies. He says, well, when you are clean, show yourself to the priest so that the priest can declare you clean. So it's not that it's hopeless. They're, for these people, incurable. These things today are still incurable. It was interesting. When I first became a Christian, I went to hear this guest speaker at a church, and it turned out he was, he's an elderly missionary who had decades before served in India in a leper colony. And he told us how, leprosy is not what we think it is. People's body parts don't just fall off. What happens is it's a disease that affects the nervous system. And so they lose sensation in their fingertips. And the way that he said many people in his leper colony lost fingertips, earlobes, noses, toes, was not because they're just walking along one day and then they're, oh wait, there's my nose. No. They would go to sleep at night. And rats would come. Mice would come and start nibbling away at their fingertips. And of course, if we went on a camping trip and even a mosquito bites us, we would feel them. We just go like that, right? We'd stop it. But they can't even feel rats eating their fingertips off. And so he said how they fixed the problem. They started raising cats. And as simple and humorous as that sounds, that's, to me, that's the way sin is a disease to us. It makes us so insensitive to God's ways, to his judgment, to righteousness. And what do we need? We need a cat, he would say. We need the Lion of Judah to come and take care of the enemy that is just destroying us. And this is what Jesus does here. He ends the disease, he heals them, but it's not just a physical ailment he's taking care of. He's also taking care of a spiritual condition. In the Old Testament and during Jesus' time, people believed if you have leprosy, that is a direct judgment of God. That's God's way of saying, I reject you, I condemn you, you have sinned. And there are diseases that we have today. It wasn't too long ago when everybody just assumed, if you have HIV, you have sinned. That is God's judgment on you. But think about it. They can't go to the synagogue. They can't go to the temple of the God they want to worship. They can't be with their family, their wives, their husbands, their children. They can't be with their friends. They can't be in the community except with other lepers. They're cut off, rejected, and judged. And Jesus says, not only am I going to cure you of a disease that's incurable, I am going to restore all these other things. What we saw in Isaiah's text today is this idea of a double blessing. We see that all throughout Scripture. It's one thing for God to say to us, he forgives us of our sin, and then you're not under judgment anymore, so no more punishment. But isn't it amazing that God says to his enemies, not only am I not mad at you anymore, I love you, and I want you to be close to me too. That he could say that, and that would be enough. But then he says, you know what else? I want to make you my children so that you become inheritors of all that I have, the kingdom of God. That you become my sons, though once you were enemies. I want to bless you. This is the kind of God that we serve. And this is what Jesus is doing here. It's not just, let me take care of what's wrong with you. Let me bless you too. And I wonder how many of us have an ailment that we can do nothing about. And I'm not just talking about a physical malady, a physical disease, an illness. I'm talking about something that's in our heart, something in our souls, something that is like a leprosy just eating us from the inside out, destroying us. Sin that has ensnared us, addictions that have enslaved us. And it can be so many things, right? It can be so many things. You know, we can look at the drug addict and say, gosh, what's wrong with those people? We can judge them thinking, I would never fall into that. But maybe we have other kinds of addictions. Maybe we're addicted to the things that we look at on the internet. Maybe we're addicted to money and financial security. Maybe we're addicted to popularity and that other people think well of us. There are so many things that can ensnare us. But Jesus can heal us. He can deliver us. Then in Luke chapter 8, verses 43 to 48, we find Jesus fighting to get through a crowd on the way to Jairus' house, where a girl is lying on her deathbed. In this critical life and death moment, Jesus stops to ask a crazy question. This great crowd is touching him all over the place, trying to get near him, and Jesus says, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And what a strange question. Even his disciple, Peter, says, and I paraphrase, Jesus, we are in a crowd. You're famous. Everybody wants to hear you. Everybody wants to see you. Everybody wants to touch you. What do you mean, who touched you? Everyone is touching you. But Jesus says, no, someone has touched me. I felt power going out. And finally, a woman who has been suffering from bleeding. And all the Bible students seem to agree. It was bleeding from her uterus. It was like a menstrual cycle that would not end, which renders her unclean. And see, as she is traveling through the crowds, she is committing many violations against the Mosaic law. But every time she comes through the crowd, how can she keep from touching other people and making them unclean? If she's found out, she is certainly going to get arrested and very likely will be executed for having jeopardized the purity of Israel. But her faith, her desperation, her need, causes her to put all those things aside. It emboldens her. This woman who's probably been living in secrecy for 12 years, not wanting to get too close to anybody lest they find out. Think about all the, today, I'm not very familiar with feminine, protection products, but, back in those days, I don't think they had disposable, fabrics like we do today. And so imagine hiding that from your family members, from your neighbor, from your priest. And all the while, you can't touch anybody. You can't be touched by anybody. You can't go around and hugging your neighbor. You can't have relations with your husband if she's married. Anybody she touches, she defiles. And she's living with this secrecy. So that even when she comes to Jesus, she doesn't come boldly to him like, Jesus, please help me. No, she just thinks, if I can just kind of reach between people's legs and if I can just touch the hem of his cloak, then I'll be healed. And she does that. All she needs to do is touch his clothes, and of course we know the story. She is healed. And Jesus says to her, daughter, meaning like daughter of Rachel, daughter of Israel, daughter of God's people, your faith has healed you. And her bleeding immediately stops. So think about that. It's not just a physical healing that's happened here. Jesus has done what he has said here. He is proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor to this woman. He is setting her free. You know what he's doing? He is giving her newness of life. That's how Paul would say it. There's newness of life here. She has been reconciled of all the things that she has lost, all the things that she has longed for and missed because of this bleeding. Can you imagine? There were probably days, I would guess, that it wasn't like it bled every day, but maybe there was a couple of days when it stopped bleeding. And she may have just hoped against hope. Maybe it's finally going to stop. If I can just make it through this week, I can present myself to the priest and do all the ceremonial things to be clean, only to have it bleed again. And how many times, I wonder, was she disappointed? How many times were her dreams dashed? And my friends, I wonder how many of us have some kind of secret that has become the great weight on our shoulders. We don't want anybody to know that this is the kind of person we are. Maybe there is some criminal past. You know what Jesus says? I am the Lord of your past. I've taken care of that. I died on the cross for that too. You're forgiven. I give you newness of life. How many of us are concerned that somebody might find out, like, that we cheat on our taxes? Maybe, it's funny because Korean people who own businesses, we just assume everybody cheats on their taxes, but I've never met one that admits it. Even though we just know all of our friends do it, right? Or what about if someone were to find out the way we parent our children? What if someone were to find out, that, I just came across this past week. I have a former Solex student. I was on his Facebook page, and he had put on there that he had attended University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. And I know that's not true. I don't know why that's on his Facebook page. He must have, all I can do is put one and one together and think, he must have let people in Korea that he wasn't at Solex, but he was at the University of Illinois the whole time, supposedly going for a degree. And now he's under the shadow of a lie he told years ago, and that's the burden he carries. That's all I can guess. But what secret burden has enslaved you? What secret burden has weighed you down and made your life so heavy that you cannot live and function the way you should? That you cannot experience God the way He wants you to experience Him in His fullness? Because you're always hiding. You're always trying to keep things from people. And let's face it, the vast majority of us in this room, in fact, maybe today every one of us in this room is Korean American. And you know what it means to be Korean American? That the primary motive for a Korean person is the avoidance of shame. The primary motive is not success and victory. The primary motive is, I don't want to fail. I don't want people to think bad of me. I don't want people to judge me. And so we are even more susceptible to the burdens of secret sins. And Jesus promises us newness of life. He says, see, I make all things new. Then in Luke chapter 7, 1 through 10, coupled with Matthew chapter 8, 5 through 13, he speaks to a Roman centurion who sent a delegation of Jewish elders to persuade Jesus to save the life of his servant, who he apparently loves quite a bit. He's suffering from paralysis. And it says that he's suffering in some terrible way. And I don't know what that means, whether there's actually some physical pain involved or it's an emotional and mental suffering of, being trapped in your body while your mind is acute and sharp. But whatever it is, the servant is suffering and the master, the centurion, cares. And he thinks something about Jesus that he sends his Jewish friends to go get him. And Jesus asks an interesting question, and he asks this in Matthew. It's in Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 13. But he asks the delegation, shall I come and heal him? They've just said, there's a servant who's sick, paralyzed, in terrible suffering. Will you come? And then Jesus says, okay, so shall I come and heal him? Doesn't that seem like a strange question? But see, there's something going on in that sentence that it's only seen in the Greek text. And I'm not making this up, but it's actually there, is that there's this idea of the emphatic I. So when Jesus says, shall I come and heal him? He's saying, shall I myself come and heal him? And why the redundancy? It's emphasis. He is saying, shall I come and do the thing that only I can do, that only I am able to do? Shall I do the thing that I am uniquely qualified for? Jesus is revealing something about himself. He's saying, are you saying that you believe that I'm the only hope? Is that why you're asking me? And so then Jesus goes to the house, and then we're told that either through messengers or the centurion himself comes out and says, Jesus, no, you do not have to come into my house. And see, this is not a case where a Roman thinks, I'm not going to let this second-rate Jew come into my house. No, this is where the Roman says, I am not worthy to have somebody like Jesus come into my house. I'm a worm. This is Jesus. Jesus, just say the word. If you say, be healed, he's going to be healed. And then Jesus, of course, is amazed. He just hasn't seen faith like this in Israel. But from a Roman, a centurion, such great faith. And from the most unlikely place, a Gentile, he seems to understand better than all the Jews who he is. That he's not just some mere mortal. I don't think he has a complete picture. Jesus is the Son of God, born of a virgin, that he'll be crucified on a cross and resurrected and sit at the right hand of God. I don't think he's thinking all those things, but he certainly is going as far as he can go in his faith with what he's got. And that's what every one of us can do. With what faith God has given us, do we go as far as we can go with that faith? Do we exercise that faith to its fullest extent? Are you feeling from God? Because you know what's happening here? Jesus does something else too. He goes to a Gentile, and all the Jews assume, you know what? Jews and Gentiles just don't mix. Gentiles know too. Enough about the Jews. The Jews don't want to have anything to do with this. They'll be defiled by us. They'll be contaminated by us. We can't be close with them. And here Jesus, before Peter has his vision that we talked about earlier, where a sheet comes down from heaven with all these unclean animals, before he meets Cornelius and learns that God is no respecter of Jews and Gentiles, he doesn't care. They're all equal. He wants to save everybody. He wants to make everybody his sheep, his people. Before even then, long before then, Jesus teaches. I don't care about Jews and Gentiles. Everyone is a precious creation. Everyone is valuable. And he heals this Gentile. He breaks, he shatters, he destroys whatever lines of demarcation have been created by men between Jews and Gentiles. Are you feeling far from God? Let me ask you something. Why do you feel far from? Why do you think you feel far from God? Is it because God is holding you at a distance and saying, I don't want to get close to you? Or is it because we hold God at a distance and say, God, I don't want to get close to you? What's the real reason? Is God holding us away, or is it we who hold him away? Last one. In Luke 18, 35 to 43, Jesus is on his way to Jericho when his attention is captivated by a man who will not be ignored. Mark tells us his name is Bartimaeus, a beggar. And when he learns that Jesus is passing by, Luke says he called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And he does include an exclamation point. So maybe he said it with a little bit of a raised voice. But you know what? Matthew and Mark tell it a little bit differently. They don't say he just called out. They say he shouted. And then when the crowds tried to tell him to be quiet, they said, hush now, hush, be quiet. It says he shouted all the more. So I imagine it's not just shouting anymore. It's yelling, it's hollering, it's screaming. So maybe it's more like, Son of David, have mercy on me. You got to hear me. You got to help me. Son of God, Son of David, have mercy on me. And why would he do that? Because he knows something. Something he's heard, something he has learned about Jesus. We're not told what it is, but he must have heard about him because as soon as he hears that Jesus is on the way nearby, he's got to have his attention. He absolutely believes something, and we learn it's that Jesus can give him sight. Mark records that Jesus summoned him. Yeah, okay, bring him over. And then the other people, and I can hear the disgust in their voice, they actually say to him, cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you. And so, as Mark says, Bartimaeus threw his cloak aside. He jumped to his feet, and he came to Jesus. Can you feel the excitement, the urgency? There's no hesitation. He knows exactly what he wants. And see, here's this. Jesus also, he knows what Bartimaeus wants. But he asks this question, and it's kind of silly. What do you want me to do for you? I mean, don't you think that's kind of a silly question? I think Jesus has a purpose. What do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus answers, Lord, I want to see. I want you guys to watch a little video clip here. I love these movie clips that give us the gospel. So,
do you want to know what it is? The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your
So what is it that Jesus is asking when he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And then when Bartimaeus says, "Lord, I want to see," I mean, it's right here. It's all over pop culture even. When Jesus asked Bartimaeus this simple question, and perhaps an unnecessary question to some, when he asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" he is asking not just, "Do you want to see?" but it's, "Do you want me to reveal to you who I am?" And why is that important? Why is that understanding important? And right now you might see, I think John's adding a little bit more meaning to this than there's actually in the text. But I think when we see what happens at the end of this story, I think you'll see that that is exactly what's happening. That this is really what Jesus is asking. Once I do this for you, are you prepared for the consequences of this miracle? Are you prepared for the way it's going to leave you unchanged? That it's going to turn upside down all your priorities? Because it's going to reveal something about me that is so life-changing that you can't keep doing what you've been doing. You can't live a life without me. And so Bartimaeus, apparently, whether he fully knows it or not, much like Neo, who probably doesn't have any clue what he's about to get himself into, but wants to know the truth. He says, "I want to see." And so Jesus, of course, makes him to see. But then what happens? Does Bartimaeus just kind of jump up and then leave? No, we are told that he follows Jesus. He follows him. The consequence of being healed is not, now I'm going to go and live my life however I please, as so many Christians do, right? We've taken the red pill, or was it the blue pill? I can't remember. I always get it mixed up. We've taken the pill that says, "Show me the truth. I want to know the truth." And then Jesus gives it to us in the gospel. He shows us his hands are pierced, and he shows us the cross and his resurrection. He shows us the truth, and yet the truth seems to give us license to live however we want. That we think Jesus has freed us to sin. That Jesus has given us liberty to live like the world. But what he has done is he has freed us from the matrix. He has freed us from the world. He has freed us from the lie. So that now we have the ability to live, to obey, to enjoy righteousness, to enjoy God's blessings, his favor, his grace, his relationship. All things that have been deprived of us. And there are a lot of people in this world walking around thinking, "I have a relationship with God. I'm a spiritual person." But it's God that just fits right in their pocket. They can just pull him out whenever they feel like it. And all the rest of the time, they just keep him in there. Don't be jumping out. This is not an opportune time. And that's how a lot of Christians are, too. But that's not what we see even in this miracle, that Jesus reveals himself, and Bartimaeus wants revelation. And once he gets it, he follows Jesus. So what am I getting at? What is Luke getting at? In each of these, a very limited survey of many different healings, we see needy, suffering, and burdened people. And I wonder if we can be at least honest enough to say, yes, I am needy, I am suffering, I am burdened too, I am enslaved too. Then nothing less than a bona fide miracle, a genuine miracle, is going to remedy my circumstances. Nothing's going to fix it except a real miracle. Said another way, men can do nothing about these situations. No, nothing that they can do about these cases. And it will take an act of God to fix it. So what's going on in your life that only God can redeem? Only God can give value to what seems so worthless, so meaningless, so pointless. What is it that only God can do to buy it all back and give it value, eternal value? What kinds of impossible and hopeless, I've tried everything and there's nothing that can be done for my problems. What kinds of those things do we need to bring to God? Let's bow our heads. My friends, come on. Let's stop messing around with God. And right now I want to ask you, please, if you want to know the truth, there is a step you have to take. There has to be a willingness. Like Bartimaeus. What do you want me to do for you, Bartimaeus? He says, I want to see. And isn't that so full of meaning? It's not just, I want to be able to see the sun again and the trees and the land and the grass and the mountains and people. I really want to see. I'm not just physically blind, I'm spiritually blind too. I need ultimate sight. And maybe you're that way too. And Jesus tells us that if we put our faith in Him, our faith in Him, who is the way, the truth, and the life, we have access to the Father. He says we have eternal life, that we will not perish. We will have newness of life. He says that He will come and dine with us. He will have fellowship with us. God will come to us for a visit. And if you want that, even with the faith the size of a mustard seed, I implore you, call out to Jesus and tell Him, save me. Save me. I want to see.